Hello. Welcome everyone to Thursdays with Natalie and Nathan.
Didn't know we were calling it that.
That's a new thing I just threw in there. I kind of like it. Welcome. We're happy to be with you again on a Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific, coming to you live from our office in Missoula, Montana. For those of you who don't know, this is Natalie Christensen, and I'm Nathan M. McTague, and we're from the Center for Emotional Education. And for the last 12 years, going on 13, we have been supporting leading workshops and doing one-to-one client work with the world's most powerful women.
Shut our door.
Okay, thanks. Natalie will be right back. And with those world's most powerful women, we've been supporting them in the area of relationship in particular, because although they've been outrageously successful and are often seen as the leader of the pack, when it comes to relationships, that's a place where they tend to struggle. And even though they are brilliant and amazing and intuitive and have lots of fortitude and creative problem-solving skills, they just can't seem to fix their way out of their relationship issues. So we've been supporting them and helping them to learn how to get their needs met, to maintain connection, and to have more fulfilling relationships without giving themselves away. And that's a big part of the work that we do when we come to these workshops, is that we're speaking to our people, and that may be you, whether or not you are one of the world's most powerful women. You may benefit from this information as well, which is largely around how to navigate in our relationships, particularly as it relates to our emotional selves and emotional processing. So today we're talking about those of us who either physically or literally get labeled as too much, or who have gotten the impression that that's what their family thought of them, or close loved ones or friends have thought of them during the course of their life. And as a result, they have either actually or have considered turning down their emotional dial so that they will be less likely to be considered too much.
And this topic is up for us this week because it's up for our clients this week. If you're watching this and you're a client, you're like, oh, they're talking about me. Well, we're talking about you, yes. But also like 4 or 5 other people where this was coming up in our calls with them. It's actually really common. And the way it works is that you were little and somebody like directly said, you're too much, I can't deal with you, right? Or you're too much, you need to go live with your father. Or you're too much, I have to take a break from you, I'm leaving the room, deal with it on your own, or something like that. They literally said that to us, and when we're little and our brains are still forming, we just suck that in. And that becomes our understanding of the world and of ourselves.
Some of those labels are, too much is one, but
yeah.
Some people who are anatomically male get made fun of and said they're being little girls or something like that. Or there are other labels that people use. You're such a crybaby, or why are you freaking out all the time? Or you overreact every time I say something.
You're so dramatic.
So dramatic is another one, yeah.
Or, so there's either is explicitly said to you in those ways, or you pick up subtle but persistent cues. So perhaps you're crying and somebody says, suck it up, brush it off, come on, let's go, right? Or you're having a big emotion and there's a literal like move away, right? Or they change the subject, or there's just a sense that, oh, when I'm that big in this particular way, or if I'm so far in this direction, either too loud, too crying, too dramatic, too upset, the people that matter to me get further away. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm too much. I got it, right? That's what your little brain says.
Mm-hmm. And there's a part of us, I think, that knows that that's kind of dangerous for people to
definitely
disconnect from us even in, or perhaps especially in times of our emotional need. And so we tend to respond to that sense because connection is so important to us and because belonging is so important to us, that we tend to modify our behavior in order to either be less likely to be labeled as too much or called too emotional, or to ensure that the people that we're in relationship with are still able to maintain connection with us. So there are several actually different ways that we tend to address it when we have the sense that others think that we're too much, especially emotionally. So one of the first and kind of main ways is we go stoic. We stop sharing our emotional stuff with others. We stop telling them about our emotional experience. We stop being vulnerable about having feelings. And we start stuffing as usually as a result of that.
Yeah, I went for placid lake. I look perfectly calm inside. All this stuff going on. Another classic one, and we do this more as adults than at a younger age, is what Nathan is calling spiritual bypassing. It's when you take like the aerial view or something, like, well, not everybody's gonna like me, or in the grand scheme of things, we're all lovable, we're all children of God, or do you have more examples like this?
Yeah, I think too, like, and where it gets into what's more commonly thought of as spiritual bypassing is when we're like, oh, just
let it go.
Just let it go. Like, don't let it get to you. Like, be mindful and stay present and shake it off. You know,
self-love is the important part anyway.
Right. Yeah.
I love myself. I think I'm great. You know, those kinds of things.
Essentially finding ways to disallow yourself from having the emotion, either because you're above it, or you're now doing this thing where, you know, like, I'm telling a different story of my life. Those ways of avoiding having the emotional experience. Another thing that we do, and actually some of the first two are actually can be combined with this, is we work really hard to help the other person be less bothered or less triggered so that they find us less triggering. A lot of empaths do this because they can feel what other people are feeling. They do a lot of trying to manage the atmosphere and the environment so that other people around them are less triggered and therefore more available for connection.
A lot of work.
Yeah. And can be
no
really
guarantee.
painful. Yeah, certainly no guarantees.
We also self-edit, you know, so we'll attempt to sort of like edit out phrases or ways of being or expressions or timing or jokes or parts of ourselves, tailor it to meet the audience. So these people are all like chill, so I'll really turn up my chill and turn down my manic, you know, or these people are really intelligent, so I'll, quote some facts and things like that, and, you know, hide the fact that I don't know anything about this subject. We do a lot of self-editing, trimming parts and augmenting parts, all to do this performance for the other people so that they are okay with us being around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, another one that's really common, and I used this one a lot in my past, was just avoid people. If you don't go around people, then they can't say that you're too much, they can't judge you, they can't move away, they can't decide that you should be having your emotions somewhere else or anything like that. You can be your fully authentic self if no one sees you. And of course, the drawback of that is that you then have way fewer connections with people and way fewer relationships where you have the opportunity to get connection, among other things.
Mm-hmm. Sort of a partner to that one is where you have to go be by yourself in order to have your feelings. Mm. So this was something that I did in the past, and I'm happy to say I don't do it anymore, thanks to your reminding me that I don't do this anymore. Was to just wait to have feelings when I was away from other people. So like be at a party and just be like, kind of like not having my own sense of self, or what if I agreed or I thought that was funny, or like totally almost out of my body, and then get home and replay it all and then have whatever feelings I was gonna have later by myself. Mm. Yeah, there's drawbacks to that as well.
I did a similar version, I think, but rather than like saving it up, it would be when I had been holding it down so long, it just came erupting out, and then I would flee and go be by myself to do the letting out.
Sure.
Or go avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the most common ways that we tend to address it when we get the sense that our emotional self is too much for our loved ones. And there are a number of reasons why these are problematic. To start off with, as we're relating to it, we're talking about the dangers of turning down your emotional dial. Well, along the lines of that analogy, we have this idea that there's only the one dial, and it's your emotional dial. And if you turn it all the way down, yes, you may succeed for a time in expressing or showing less of your anger or less of your sadness or less of your anxiety or the other uncomfortable emotions you may be trying to hide. But because there's only the one dial, you're also turning down your experience or your availability for things like joy and contentment and curiosity and playfulness. And so if you want to have access to those, you got to leave that dial turned up enough that you can sense them when they happen. Another way that we relate to this is we talk a lot of times, and if you've seen our earlier workshop videos, you've probably heard us talk about the two cups. And one is the resilience cup, or the self-care and self-nurturing cup. The other is the emotions cup, or also called the capacity cup. And for our emotional cup, like that's where all of our emotions go. And if we're, daily, it's getting filled up already without our helping it with, things like disappointments and tiny frustrations and a little bit of anxiety and stress, and all of that stuff is going into that cup and filling up our capacity. And eventually it gets so full that it starts to overflow. And that's when we have kind of meltdowns, or where our emotion leaks out into situations where it's pretty inconvenient. But it also means if it's full up, our capacity is full with all of these unprocessed, painful, or uncomfortable feelings, we have no room to put the joy. We have no room to have capacity for feeling other things that we'd be interested in feeling. So it becomes really useful for us to drain off some of that hurtful emotion so we have more capacity, so we have more room. We'll get to that in a minute, but for the time being, it's useful to remember that there's only one dial. So if you turn it down for the emotions that you don't want people to see, you're also turning it down for the emotions that you probably would like to have.
That's such a big disappointment for most of us to remember that or learn that. It's like, oh, are you kidding me? I would rather not have that feeling. I turned it way off. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, that's why you're so flat and not having an actual enjoyable life. I've
had actually so many clients who, once we start doing the emotional work and they're making room for their less comfortable emotions, they also report, I actually feel a lot more joy now too, which I didn't expect to be part of this whole operation.
Right. I let some feeling out. I sobbed all day, and then I was really happy. It's like, oh, yeah, there's room for that now. Well, this is a really huge drawback, and I think it's really important to mention. The drawback of making yourself smaller and not too much is that you don't actually get to experience authentic love, which I think is a goal that we all share as human beings. Like, we really want to experience that, what that's like to just really be loved for who we are.
It's a real core need.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do this, we're busy curating this particular presentation, and then if we receive love, we're like, okay, you love me, but I performed something for you and you love that. Like, you don't know me, and so I can't actually trust that your love for me is authentic as well. We set it up that way, we only present so much, and then we receive love, and then we're like, okay, but you didn't see all the rest of me, so I don't really know if you like me all the way, right? And so we live in doubt about our genuine lovability because we never give other people the chance to love us all the way. If we're, you don't get to see this part, well, then we don't know if they love this part. Mm-hmm. We don't get to experience them loving the whole thing because we're only showing a part of it.
And what generally winds up going along with that is that we then resent the people for not seeing who we are, or appreciating who we are, or loving us authentically. Often at the back end is like, you know, the discussion becomes something like, or the argument becomes something like, you don't accept me for who I am, or you never appreciated me, or you never saw me, or all of these ways in which we have wind up holding it against the other person when we have only been showing, you know, like some of ourselves, or the version of ourselves that we thought they wanted to see anyway. So it can be a real recipe for resentment.
I have several clients that have fantastic husbands, and they're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. He's really nice, and he really loves me, and he tells me that all the time. And when he does, I just want to punch him in the face. Like, I don't like him. Like, for some reason, I'm repulsed by that. There must be something wrong with me. And there isn't. It's that they've only revealed this much, and the husband is saying, I love you, and they're saying, you don't know me. You jerk. You think you know me. I'm just presenting what I know you'll like. It's really sad.
Yeah.
Sad for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Another drawback to trying to not be too much is that, as Nathan mentioned before, we tend to isolate ourselves. So if there's a risk of being considered too much, we just won't go out. We won't go to that party, or we won't go for lunch with friends, or we start to trim off parts of our lives where it's a risk of being seen as too much. And slowly but surely, our world just gets really small. So maybe we work by ourselves, or live by ourselves, and talk with friends maybe occasionally. Like, and you're like, what happened? Why is my life so small all of a sudden? I'm not really living. That can be a really major drawback to living so as to not be too much for other people.
Well, I even had the experience of that for myself when I would be out somewhere, like at a party, or in the days when I might go to the bar or something like that, or go dance. And like I would be holding myself back so much that even in a crowded place, I felt isolated.
Yeah, I've done that too.
I felt alone or lonely. Yeah, it can be so painful. Another thing that tends to happen if we get into this practice of tamping our emotions down so that, you know, other people aren't seeing them, or so that they don't think that we're too much for having them, is that we're more likely to invite explosive eruptions of emotion when it does come out. If you think of it sort of like, again, using that analogy of the cup for your capacity, if you put a cap on top of that cup so that the idea is that nothing ever comes out, well, what really happens is a bunch of pressure builds underneath that cap. And eventually it's too much to hold, and either it's just a little leak like that, or it blows the whole lid. And then it can take, you know, days, weeks, years to recover the relationships that get damaged because of an eruption like that. So again, like tamping it down, holding it back, invites more opportunities for there to be more explosive eruptions.
And something that's shared with all of these strategies that we sort of pick up is basically shame comes on the heels of most of these strategies. So you do the explosion, and then you're like, oh, what is wrong with me? And it just rips that person's head off. You know, you're riddled with shame. Or you go to the party and you're like, fake guy. Hey, I'm fake guy. Just trying to not show you that I'm totally nervous. And then you're like, ugh, I hate that guy. You know, you just like feel shame for having to do something in order to keep those feelings tucked away, having to be a version of yourself that's not right. And shame is one of those feelings that once it shows up, it's really powerful, and it can drive you straight into your survival brain where you're frozen, or fighting all the time, or running all the time. Like, it's one of those feelings that can really drive the boat, so to speak, drive the bus. You know, like if it's present, it's probably in charge, and it's making choices that you wouldn't otherwise choose.
Yeah, yeah. So in addition to all of that, and if that weren't plenty enough,
That's like a downer video.
This part really is, yeah. But I think part of that is because we're spelling out the dangers of doing this when this is not supposed to be a rosy discussion. So another thing that often occurs for people who get, I want to say skilled, but I don't know, if you get practiced at tamping down your emotions or keeping things in, then you really open yourself up for the experience of a lot more chronic illness, a lot more chronic pain, and in some cases, or eventually autoimmune disorders, because that emotion that doesn't get expressed, it shows up in the body. It just stays with us until there's a way for the body or the survival system to express it for us. So that's when we explode, or when we get sick, or when we start having pain or autoimmune disorders. That's the body trying to deal with all of this tamped down, stored historical emotional backlog. And there's one thing that's not on our list that I wanted to just tuck in really quick.
I thought of some more as well.
There are actually a lot of negative ramifications from tamping down our emotions, and we're really just hitting some of the basics. But one that I think that is important for our audience in particular is that for those of you who are trying to develop your intuitive self, or you have a real strong intuitive sense that you don't want to lose, well, turning down your emotional dial also dampens your intuition. So if you want to have access to your intuition, and or you want to expand your access or increase the power of your intuition, then allowing the dial on your feelings to go back up is one of the most important things to do just from the beginning. Was there another one that you just really wanted to get? No,
I think it's sort of like a blend of what we've already talked about. So obviously you're like, okay, I get it. I don't want to do that anymore.
Turning down my emotional dial is not good for me. What do I do?
Yeah, what do I do instead?
Nathan and Natalie, what do I do?
So the very first thing is, so you can track it back to like the origin story of this, right? You picked up these clues that you were too much. And so the first thing that we ask you to do is revisit some of those moments with this new perspective. And that perspective is you were perceived as too much, not because of who you are, but because of what that other person had going on for them. So if they were already at capacity, right, they're already filled with all of their anxiety and fear and disconnection and anger and depression, like whatever they're holding, because our parents were holding a lot, whatever they're holding, made it so that whatever then you were presenting, whatever feelings you were presenting, they felt like it was too much for them to be able to handle, right? So their cup is already full. You put one little drop in there and it's going to overflow.
Right.
So that communication that you were getting from them was more about them. They were saying, that's hard for me. What's happening here is hard for me. I gotta move away, right? Because when we're overloaded like that, we do fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So you had some emotion, and they moved away because they already had so much on board, not because there was something inherently wrong with you or that emotion or having that emotion. So that's a really important perspective. You're great. As much as you are is the right amount, but you happen to be trying to elicit connection from somebody that wasn't available for it, and your emotion added into their experience, and they fled or they fought it to some degree.
Yeah. And this is a subject that we'll get more into in another workshop, but emotional coherence means that when someone else, like when I'm feeling something, and because I'm connected to Natalie, and especially because we're sharing space, then she will start to feel some of what's going on for me. And we think of this as just being something that empaths do, but we all do it to some degree. And you can't really turn that off.
Nor do you want to.
Right. But so what happens is, though, when you, let's say you were younger and it was with your parents, but it could have been with any loved one at any time in your life. But just using the example of when you're a child with your parents, their capacity was already full. You came near with your emotion. No matter how much it would have been too much for them where they were. Just because they could feel through the emotional coherence some connection to yours. And so whether or not you even came in and said, I'm feeling upset, or cried or anything, just your being near with any amount of emotion would have likely been enough for them to feel like their capacity was overwhelmed. So again, it had nothing to do with you, likely, most likely. So with that in mind, one of the things we would like to invite you to do is to begin to experiment with vulnerability again. Maybe it's been a long time since you've been willing to be vulnerable at all. Maybe you've been living, 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, however many years of trying to have that emotional dial turned down so you wouldn't be too much. And so you've gotten into a habit of living that way. So what we invite you to do is just begin to make the tiny experiments of showing a little bit of vulnerability here, showing a little bit of vulnerability there, showing a little bit of vulnerability there, growing your capacity, your ability to do so, growing your comfort zone so that you have more room to do that, and doing it with people that you feel safe, who you are safe with, who can hold space for the emotion for you or with you, so that you're likely to get a more positive response or a connective response. And then as you get more used to it, you can try being vulnerable in situations where you would have been too afraid to do so before.
The idea is to, when you got programmed to understand that revealing these parts of myself makes it unsafe for me. So the idea is to convince your system that that's not true anymore, right? Maybe it was when you were little, but you have different community now. It's not still necessarily still true. So you can take a little baby step and you realize, oh, I was vulnerable and that actually garnered more connection. I feel closer to this person. Ah, okay. So it isn't, that's an old belief that I'm unwinding. And like Nathan said, choosing somebody safe to be vulnerable with is a really good idea because you want to set yourself up for success. So previous to this in my last call, it was like your arch enemy is not somebody that you would try this with, right? You're not like, here's this vulnerable, squishy spot, and your arch enemy's like, ah, and stabs you right in that spot. And then you're like, I was right. It's not safe. I am too much, right? Mm-hmm. I like to do it also not with just safe people, but no one's inconsequential, but inconsequential relationships. So like the grocery clerk, for instance, they'll say, hey, how you doing, right? And the cultural answer is, good, how are you, right? Fine, how are you? And instead I've just started saying things like, a little bit bummed out. And they're like, really? Oh man, sorry to hear that. Kind of having that kind of day too, right? And then we have this like totally authentic interaction, and then I say, bye, thank you, and they leave, right? It was so low risk. I could actually say what's true here, because this person, whether or not they move away from me or toward me, is not that scary. But I've found time and time again that they move toward me. Yeah. When I say something that's true for myself.
I don't think we can underscore that point enough, that by and large, what we've both found, what our clients all seem to have found, is that the more that we're willing to be vulnerable, the more likely we are to be met with connection. Just tends to be the way it works out. And I will also say that I'm regularly now acknowledged for how authentic I can be, when I definitely grew up as one of the most stoic people you will ever meet. So I just want to put that plug in for how far someone can move if this is the kind of work that they're involving themselves in, and if you're taking these moments and opportunities to just experiment with your vulnerability. Give it a shot. And then also, like it happens to be our next what do you do, the next step in the things, or the next way of addressing this that we suggest, but it's also a natural outgrowth of involving yourself or inviting yourself to have these experiments with vulnerability, is that you begin to reprogram your brain. Now, there's this reprogramming your brain is a long game kind of engagement. It took however old you are to get the programming that you have now. And it takes a while, and it takes focus, and it takes concentration, and it takes being willing to get back up on the horse and get back up on the horse and get back up on the horse so many times in order to reprogram the way your brain is wired. But because our brains are plastic, it's absolutely inevitable if you stay at it. If you continue doing the work, you can't not change your brain. And there are three ways that I'll go through really quickly that this happens. One is when you're first working on it, your brain secretes chemicals that help you learn it and pick up it, get the skill going over the course of a day or over the course of your practice time. And that will support you for short-term development. But then as you continue working with it and doing it more and more, you get, instead of just the neurochemical environment for learning, you also get new wiring. And as that wiring has a chance to continue being used more and more and more and more, it gets coated in myelin, so it gets super fast. It goes from like initially, whatever speed it is, it gets to like 75 times faster once it's coated in myelin. So then those neural pathways are ones that are getting used frequently and easily, and it becomes easier and easier to use them. But then the third part is that your brain eventually starts changing its structure to accommodate the learning. So the example I always go to is that people who grew up in environments that were highly stressful or had a lot of trauma in their early experience, they have inflamed amygdalas. And over the course of reprogramming your brain, you can train your amygdalas to become less inflamed, and even to grow more receptors for oxytocin at the base of them so that they're more quickly able to come down from excited states. So that's not exactly related to this, but an example of how the brain changes its structure to accommodate our learning. So that point being, if you really want to get good at this, if you really want to have the emotional range that is your birthright, if you will, you have to involve yourself in this process of experimenting with your vulnerability over time so that you reprogram how your brain works around being vulnerable and sharing your feelings authentically.
If that sounds like something you're interested in, but it's a little overwhelming to do it on your own, you're not wrong for thinking that, because it's a lot harder on your own. This is precisely what we do with people. We call ourselves relationship coaches and various other things, but what it is that you show up with us, we provide emotional safety, you gain access to a wider range of emotions, you get more confident revealing what those are because we're so safe, you can say anything to us. And then your brain goes, oh, I thought it wasn't safe to do that. It is safe to do that. Oh, okay. And then we do it. We do this dance again and again and again for each call. You reveal, we get curious, we expand it further, you understand more about yourself, you have more sense of what your full emotional array is. You're fully revealed to us, you're safe. Your brain goes, oh, I didn't die. It was safe to do that. It happens again and again and again. And in that way, we help you reprogram your brain. The best ways to do that is just to work with us straight up, just like buy a bundle of calls and do this. Another way to do it is to just come on our retreat, right? And just jump into the pool that way and have like an immersive experience and get some reprogramming in that week's time. And then like the third most potent version would be to work with us and come to the retreat and then keep working with us. Mm-hmm. And then you could have like a full remodel of your brain. Today we're talking about reprogramming around thinking that you're too much and managing that differently. That's the reprogramming we're talking about. But this reprogramming can happen in any area. So like, I'm always terrified. I have too much anxiety to go to the grocery store. Okay, we can work with that and do reprogramming around that. Or I can't stay in a relationship. I always blow it up and run away. Okay, so that's a reprogramming opportunity. So today this is what we're talking about. But in general, you can reprogram your brain to respond differently, to have a different experience around any emotional experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as Natalie was saying, there are a few different ways that you can get support from us, but we encourage you, if we're not the right people for you, or if coming on the retreat with us to Hawaii in May 3rd through 10th, I should say, and spending the week with us and doing that work, or working with us one-to-one, or any of that, if we're not the right match for you, that's great. I'm happy for you to feel that aligned truth for you, but please, we encourage you to find someone with whom you resonate and get support from them to do this work of reprogramming your emotional brain. You'll have a much fuller life if you do.
We don't think you're too much.
We definitely don't think you're too much.
We want you to be your full muchness.
Yes, yes. We really, really, really hope that you will get to be your full muchness in whatever ways that means to you. Okay, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll see you on a future Thursday with Natalie and Nathan. Be well. Oh, I finally did.